Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert. You're at The Listening Post. This week, Barack Obama and the U.S. media.
Let's face it, the easiest way to get on television right now is to be really rude.
Fair comment or racism in disguise. The Iran story still bubbling under in the blogosphere. What do the media in Argentina and Turkey have in common? Problems with the government and the taxman.
They hate our way of life.
And the stormtroopers from Star Wars and their take on America after 9/11.
Yeah, baby.
On last week's broadcast, we reported on the very public shouting match over President Barack Obama's health care reform proposals. However, the American media circus does not end there. The airwaves have been filled with allegations that Obama's a secret socialist, a Marxist, a Muslim, a foreigner even who has no legal right to be in the White House. And former President Jimmy Carter has said that much of the grist in the 24-hour news mill has its roots in racism. In the run-up to the UN and G20 meetings, Obama went on an interview blitz across the American news networks with a very specific message to those networks and their audiences. Our starting point this week is the U.S. president's beef with the 24-hour news cycle and the question of whether what's being said about Barack Obama on the air and in print is just politics or something that's more dangerous. President Obama and his message for the American news media.
The easiest way to get on CNN or Fox is to just say something rude and outrageous.
As the president tried to refute criticisms of his health care reform, a Republican congressman yelled out, "You lie."
The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally.
They focus on the most extreme elements on both sides. They can't get enough of conflict.
Why did you bring a gun to a presidential event today?
If you're just being sensible and making your arguments, you don't get time on the nightly news.
The country's got big problems, yet what we have is a media that is largely concerned about whether or not Obama was legitimately born here in the United States.
He's chosen not to release his original birth certificate or a copy of it.
Talking about whether he's a socialist.
He has surrounded himself with Marxists his whole life.
Whether his administration is evocative of the Nazi regime.
Why do you continue to support a Nazi policy, as Obama has?
These outrageous assertions that are coming from purported news channels and purported news figures.
I think one reason the president has, gone out of his way to mention this is because what people are seeing on cable TV news, talk radio in particular, is really harming his ability to advance his agenda.
Let's face it, the easiest way to get on television right now is to be really rude.
We're not talking about, in the wake of the largest financial crisis in the Great Depression, we're talking about fictional death panels or the rise of fascism, Stalinism. We're talking about czars, all this idiotic nonsense.
And had a communist mentor.
It is hard to know where to start with this story. Take the recent 9/12 protests, the source of much anti-Obama name-calling. Does one begin with the event or with the media's coverage of the event?
This is, as best I can describe it, an absolute grassroots movement.
Because the media, in this case Fox News, helped make the event happen.
Do you want Washington to listen?
From the Tea Parties in April to the 9/12 protests, this insurgent movement has been fomented, publicized, advertised, given a platform by, and in that case coordinated in a very kind of acute sense by Fox News. It's been a kind of cooperative undertaking from day one.
Guys, I'm very proud of the job that you have done. You should be very proud of yourselves. And to everyone there standing for freedom and liberty, God bless all of them. Thank you.
Now, I have no problem with people coming to protest. I think that's great. But to have a so-called news program being the emotional and the intellectual spearhead for that is just completely unconscionable.
Thousands are expected to participate in a march on Washington.
If it was just Fox, that would be one thing. But what Fox does affects other U.S. media. Red herring talking points in the healthcare debate, like death panels for the elderly, the specter of a government takeover, may get their start on Fox, but those fabrications then echo through other news outlets. Glenn Beck, the Fox News host who helped inspire the 9/12 protests, was the subject of a recent Time magazine cover story. Beck is famous for calling President Obama a racist who hates white people.
Whenever you have someone who's more about him or herself than truth, when that person becomes rewarded with the cover of a national news magazine, I don't know what we're saying.
In the article, Time said of the 9/12 protest in Washington, if you get your information from liberal sources, the crowd numbered 70,000. If you get your information from conservative sources, the crowd was perhaps as many as 1 million. Time got those two numbers right, but the sourcing was off the mark.
When you actually dig beneath the surface, you find out it wasn't the left saying 70,000 showed up, it was the Washington, D.C. Fire Department. So we've gotten to this point where somehow facts are now in dispute.
But it's not just how many people showed up to protest, it's what they are saying about America's first black president. When it comes to the rhetoric that has been aired,
President Obama is making the biggest power grab in American history.
And the potential dangers of it, there are two schools of thought. The first,
I think it's generally just stupid and overblown to compare people to Stalin and Hitler. I think it generally is self-negating as a sort of rhetorical and argumentative tactic. In terms of the danger of it, I'm not quite convinced that the rhetoric itself is dangerous.
And the second school of thought.
The danger is there that you inflame a certain fringe element that could do something dangerous. Instead of just walking around with a gun outside of a town hall, maybe the next Yahoo decides to shoot up a town hall.
On the day that Kennedy arrived in Dallas when he was killed in November 1963, November 22nd, there was a full-page ad in the local Dallas newspaper with a black border. It looked like it was a funeral. It said, "Welcome, Mr. Kennedy." It went on to accuse the president of being a communist tool. This type of hatred was quite present there, and I think helped incite people like Oswald. I think with that background, we should be especially aware in America that although dissent and skepticism is great, when the discourse gets too extreme, that it can encourage violent behavior, and that has to be the real warning for all of us and the wake-up call as well, so that it doesn't happen in the case of Barack Obama.
No one knows where the story of the Obama presidency is going, but we do know who is driving it. It's the 24-hour news channels, with all those hours to fill and plenty of angry voices with which to fill them.
I want to know if it's coming out of my paycheck.
How is this happening, and how is the mainstream media parroting it so often? How are we watching again, in a country where we have a Democratic majority in Congress, a Democrat in the White House, where the right-wing media appears to still be setting so much of our popular and public agenda?
That is something President Obama might want to ask of the media people questioning him.
If you say something outrageous, you're there in a hot second.
Here's how our Global Village voices see the continuing battles that President Obama has on his hands with the American media.
I think that President Obama's assessment that the media thrives on extreme political comments is fair. And I believe that this happens because it's a pure monetary issue. People are incensed by extreme political comments and therefore are going to read more news publications, watch more news programs, and ultimately that means more money for the media.
The comparisons between Obama and Hitler and the rallies where you see them show that today's right-wing fringe has decided to be more like yesterday's left-wing fringe, which is weird because the left started winning when they toned down that 2004 era panic.
If you'd like to be one of our Global Village voices, you can email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net, but most contributors just go on Facebook and find the Listening Post page there. We have more than 2,000 viewers signed up. You can also follow us through Twitter. We will let you know via Facebook and Twitter what stories we're working on and how you can get with the program. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. There's a multi-billion-dollar showdown underway in Turkey between the Erdogan government and the country's largest media conglomerate, Doğan Yayın. The company has been hit with a $2.5 billion fine for failing to pay taxes, but it says the fine is politically motivated. Doğan Yayın's holdings amount to about half of Turkey's media landscape. They include national top-selling newspapers, Hürriyet and Milliyet, as well as national TV outlets, Channel D, Star TV, and CNN Turk, which it owns in partnership with Time Warner. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Erdogan's Islamic government urged Turks to boycott the company's newspapers over their critical coverage. However, Erdogan denies the new fines have anything to do with that. The European Commission has condemned the fine and says the dispute and its impact on media freedom in Turkey could affect next month's progress report on Turkey's attempts to join the European Union. Last week, we told you about the Argentinian government going after that country's media giant, Grupo Clarín, ostensibly over overdue taxes. Now the Congress there has passed a new law that could lead to the dismantling of media conglomerates. The new legislation comes as the Argentinian president, Cristina Fernández, battles it out with Grupo Clarín, which has been critical of Fernández and her husband, the former president, Néstor Kirchner. The law would not affect newspapers, however, it would limit the number of cable companies and TV stations that conglomerates can own. The government says the law would provide diversification of media ownership. Critics argue the result will be more media outlets in the government's hands. Myanmar, which imprisoned journalists after the political protests back in 2007 and Cyclone Nargis in 2008, has released 2 of them as part of a prisoner amnesty program. Both A. Kai U and Jojo Tsa were jailed by the military government after their coverage of the cyclone. They got 2 and 7 years respectively for allegedly inciting hatred against the government. According to Agence France Presse, more than 7,000 prisoners were freed in the amnesty program. The number of political prisoners in Myanmar had doubled to more than 2,000 since the protests in 2007. Both reporters say they now plan to return to journalism. A few weeks back, we reported on the Israeli government's anger over a Swedish newspaper report that alleged that in the early 1990s, Israeli soldiers stole and then sold the organs of some dead Palestinian men. The paper that published that story, the Aftonbladet tabloid, has been cleared in the case by Sweden's Chancellor of Justice. The Chancellor, Göran Lamberts, looked into the complaint and chose not to open an investigation. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu demanded that the Swedish government condemn the newspaper for the report, but Sweden's Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt refused. He said a free press is an integral part of Sweden's democracy. Rupert Murdoch is suing Italian Prime Minister and fellow media potentate Silvio Berlusconi. Murdoch's News Corp is taking 2 of Berlusconi's Mediaset firms to court, accusing them of refusing to allow Murdoch's Sky Italia satellite channel to advertise on Berlusconi's terrestrial network. News Corp is arguing that Mediaset is violating EU antitrust legislation as well as Italian competition laws. The Italian legal case might be harder to win since Berlusconi runs the government. Murdoch and Berlusconi used to get along, but recently they've been slugging it out over the Italian market. And Berlusconi has accused Murdoch of personal attacks against him in the Times of London, which printed a series of articles on Berlusconi's marital troubles. This Murdoch versus Berlusconi feud has a vague alien versus predator feel to it, in that, like the movie, viewers might have difficulty sympathizing with one character over the other. We're back after the break when we'll check in with the new media players in Iran to take the political temperature there.